Minister Basile, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests. Thank you for inviting us to participate in this panel today, and thank you all for attending. We know what a hardship it is for Saturday morning after the nice evening we had yesterday, so we doubly appreciate it. Successful economies usually result from the smart coordination of fiscal and monetary policies. They're almost like the two hands that need to be clapping together in order to produce the economic growth that is necessary for countries to thrive. For years now, I mean, Lebanon is just a microcosm, but if you look at Europe, if you look at the US, we've had complete paralysis on the fiscal side. And we know all the reasons in Lebanon, but even in the US, getting Congress to act on something, we look at the European Union. So we're left in a situation where central banks have had to shoulder the pain of economic growth, and I think we're quickly reaching the limit of what central banks can do. For Lebanon, we have different reasons for this paralysis that we're going through, but it's a phenomenon that we see happening everywhere. We will touch today on existing GDP drivers, and we'll try to suggest new GDP drivers that can help propel the economy in Lebanon. We will work on a parallel track of suggesting these positive developments that play to the strength of our country, of our geographical location in the region, and the strengths of the Lebanese. But I think we would be remiss if we don't talk a little bit also about the conditions that are necessary to have that economic growth. It would be a futile exercise if we talk about the possibility of expanding the funds management industry in Lebanon, or the real estate, or all the things that we'll talk about. But in order for these things to flourish, we need the environment that allows them to flourish. The paralysis that we're seeing on the political front completely kills any initiative and any role that we can play in this regard. There are three different levels that we need to work on, aside from sort of the GDP drivers, to allow us to do the things we'd like to do. One is we need a stable political situation. Two, we need basic services to be in line, at least, with sort of the civilized world, whether it's electricity, it's water, it's internet, high-speed connection, it's all that stuff. But then we need to also go to a third level, which is something that we see in common from all the countries that came from behind and managed to increase their economic growth. And that's sort of what we call the ease of doing business. And I cannot stress the importance of that component, the ease of doing business. So our message is going to be a very positive one. In Lebanon, we are blessed with one of the best real estate places in the world, the location of the country. We're blessed with people that have succeeded beyond belief in virtually every field. The only task that we have is to create the environment in Lebanon that has allowed the Lebanese to succeed outside of Lebanon, for them to be able to do for their own country what they were able to do outside. But at the same time, actions have consequences, and political paralysis completely kills what we hope to do on the economic front. So with that, I'd like to first start by introducing our panelists. Maybe we'll start with Roger, if you just say a few words, and then we'll work our way down. By the way, sorry, Roger, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Mark Malik. My day job is a hedge fund manager here in New York. I spent my career on Wall Street, worked in Japan, in Europe, and in the US. And I also have the privilege of chairing the board of directors for LIFE, Lebanese International Finance Executive, which is an organization that is for Lebanese in finance that we spoke about, you heard all about yesterday, so I won't repeat myself. Sorry, Roger.
My name is Roger Dager. I'm the Chief Financial Officer of Bank of Beirut. Actually, Bank of Beirut, it's a major bank in Lebanon. We work in 9 countries, 4 continents. We are the only bank that operates in Australia. Before joining Bank of Beirut, I was a regulator. I worked with the Central Bank of Lebanon as a bank supervisor.
My name is Nassim. Formally, I'm a professor at NYU, but I don't like to go there. And I do scientific research typically on large deviations, and I'm particularly interested in how systems grow from disorder, from problems. Meaning, I don't think a negative political situation of the type we have in Lebanon is necessarily bad for economic life. It's definitely very bad for traffic jams, but not for everything.
I'm Naim Abu Jawdi. I was born in Lebanon, left in '78. I started in banking. I'm in asset management now. I'm the CEO of Candriam Investor Group. It's a group managing 110 billion US dollar and part of New York Life. I'm also chairman of Nilim International, expanding the business in Asia, in Europe, and in the Middle East for New York Life for $250 billion. I'm part of the board of Life as well, and I'm at the board of Teach for Lebanon in London.
Nabil Aithani, Chairman General Manager of the Investment Development Authority of Lebanon. This is the authority which has a mandate to encourage and to support, to facilitate for any investment in some target sectors in Lebanon. And we'll explain about later on.
Rand Ghayad, Professor of Economics, and I co-direct a Center for Labor and Market Research at MIT in Boston. Prior to that, I was in public policy, most recently at the National Economic Council at the White House doing research on unemployment. Thank you.
Great. Thank you all. The first question that we'd like to tackle today is the role of the banking system in economic growth. So, considering that the banking sector is the main engine of economic growth, how can that sector promote economic diversification under the guidance of the central bank? I'll lead that question with you, Roger, if you can. And in the answer, if you can talk a little bit also about the role of microfinance within the banking system.
Sure. Actually, considering the banking sector, including the Central Bank of Lebanon as the main engine of economic growth, actually is correct. And it's also true that the banking sector should promote economic diversification. Our sector actually is very successful, resilient, and most importantly, that we have a very strong central bank in Lebanon. To reply to your question, we need to discuss 3 issues actually. First, is Lebanon economy diversified? Second, what is the current role of the banking sector? Third, what we should do next. This is very important. In a simplified way, the economic diversification can be measured by the balance between economic sectors in producing GDP. Additionally, we should go further and know whether the exports or investments, human capital, technology, and knowledge are well diversified and flexible in our economy. Currently, we have the composition of Lebanon's GDP actually is 5% agriculture, 20% for industry, 75% for the service sector. It's also to be noted that the diaspora remittances, which is very important for our economy, actually account for more than $7.2 billion in 2015, which constitute around 15% of our GDP. Actually, it's one of the highest ratios in the world. Basically, we need to discuss if our model, our current model, is robust and resilient, or we need to change, or we need to diversify further. I think we can have an agreement altogether that leaving the banking sector aside, the tourism and real estate sectors are actually highly sensitive to political and economic risk. That's why I believe we need more diversification. For point number 2, what is the role of the banking sector in diversification? In fact, our sector, with the help and guidance of the Central Bank of Lebanon, have established a set of powerful drivers for economic diversification, especially about interest subsidy. We have in Lebanon interest subsidy schemes. We have interest subsidy by the Lebanese Treasury, which covers actually the new project in Lebanon for tourism, industry, agriculture, and information technology. We also have an interest subsidy scheme by the central bank itself, covering vast range of financing needs. For example, we have the housing loan. In Lebanon, we have a subsidized housing loan, very low interests, and long-term financing. We have the microfinance, microcredit. The interest rate actually could be down to 0% for microfinance. This is all subsidized by the central bank. We have educational loans subsidized also by the central bank, down to 0% in some cases. And we have subsidy for eco-friendly projects, green projects in Lebanon, also down to 0% financing cost. And we have also subsidizing the loans to SMEs for agriculture, industry, and tourism. This is very important. The incentive schemes in Lebanon for financing costs is very important. And we can add the startups. We talked yesterday about startup funding. Actually, this is practically a full support from the central bank to finance startups. We're talking about interest rate free for funding 75% participation of the bank in startups, which is a very good incentive for the startups. For point number 3, what should we do next? Let me start by saying that financially our banking sector is able to finance the sector, the private sector. We have enough liquidity to continue financing the private sector. However, we need the public debt financing pace should be in a reasonable pace, because if we have too much demand on public debt financing, it will hinder our capacity to lend to private sector. Practically, I have some points, some recommendations. First, I believe we should promote more added value, or what we say, rich job-driven sectors like agriculture and industry. So we need to refocus more on agriculture and industry. For the banking sector, we can do that by simply redirecting some financing, subsidized financing to these sectors. It's not so bad, it's easy. And second, we need to put more focus on the microfinancing. This is very important for Lebanon. We need to promote microfinancing to fight the poverty in the villages. We need to continue, this is very important, Mr. Chairman, to support the housing sector. Housing loan is very important. This subsidy, this focus will protect the real estate sector. We need to protect the real estate sector. It's very important. Also, we need to rely on our educated, talented, and relatively cheap human resources to foster the technology and media businesses. 5, we need to continue to finance the high level of education in Lebanon. Actually, we have already educational loans in place, subsidized educational loan. It's a long-term financing for students virtually at 0%. So we need to continue at this pace. 6, actually the financial system in Lebanon is a bank-based system. We don't have really a financial system, we have a banking system. So we need to develop the complementary capital markets. This will create more liquid, will be more liquidity and deeper market for the private sector institutions. Finally, one one word. It's actually the banking sector, or the Central Bank of Lebanon, is not only the sole policy maker. We have also other policy makers. I'm talking about the government. I'm talking about public sector. So we need, in the same time, in parallel, like you said, we have to promote a good public sector governance. This is very important. We cannot succeed alone. We need to finalize the governance of the public-private partnership. It's very important. Let's go on with the privatization. Privatization will contribute to economic diversification. Finally, let's start with the oil. Let's start with development of the offshore oil and gas. This is very important for the economy. We're talking about $100 billion in oil and gas revenue. So it is very important for the economic diversification. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. I just have one follow-up question, and maybe if other of the panelists have a comment or a question. Given sort of, well, two-part question really. One is how easy it is to get credit in Lebanon for businesses. We know there is money, but at least from an outside observer, it looks like investing in our government bonds is a fairly lucrative and safe alternative for the banks. Is that draining money away, that safety, that effectiveness of the central bank? Is it taking money away from the pool that can be used to finance a lot of these businesses and ideas? Maybe if you can touch a little bit on the ease of borrowing, not just the availability of money.
First, I assure you that our banking sector has enough liquidity. Really, we are very much liquid. We have a loan-to-deposit ratio at around 37%. So imagine what amount of liquidity we have. We have it in the Central Bank of Lebanon. So we are committed to finance the public sector. This is very important for us. And we also committed to finance the private sector. For the easy, how easy to get a credit, actually it's very easy. It's not complicated. Because the system is in place since 2002. And if it is a subsidized loan, I guess you will have 1 month to 2 months to get the loan. This is a maximum. If it's not subsidized, it will be like 15 days. So it's easy to get credit, no problem. However, we need to have the financed project should be in Lebanon, not elsewhere, to be subsidized. This is very important.
Thank you. Any of the other panelists have any comments on this question before we move on?
Yeah, I have a structure. I mean, to replace my talk, I have two severe I have problems with the notion of causative financing. So let me start with this problem. Let's take Silicon Valley. The innovation in Silicon Valley came from someone in Washington was making a policy to help it. Okay, if you look at history, let's take two regions. The Industrial Revolution in the UK and Silicon Valley. It started with no financing, bootstrap financing, and it's only when the technology became interesting enough for investors that investment came. So the idea of making money available to startups forces people to do MBA-style business plans. So the sexiest business plans, most interesting, was going to get the money, rather than reality prevailing. So but if you look at Microsoft, financing came much later. Apple, the garage, these people had no financing. The same in the Industrial Revolution. Now, financing is good, but it should be organic, come later, and you go prove yourself, and typically you get financing when you don't need the money. As the French say, on ne prête qu'aux riches. All right, so really, that's the first statement about financing. So financing is good for families as a policy to lower social inequality. Yeah, for people to get housing, yes. But for startups, I would be extremely careful. Okay, that's the first statement. The second one concerning education. Education, people had the illusion that you increase the level of education in a country, you increase GDP. And it's obvious to people that rich countries have high level of education. They don't realize what comes first. Okay, typically GDP goes up, then education follows. And in fact, when you put people in school, you lower the rate of entrepreneurship. Imagine Microsoft drop out. Imagine forcing him, to be at school. He'd be a corporate lawyer, all right? Facebook also drop out. Steve Jobs drop out. Larry Ellison drop out. So we noticed that effectively, but I'm not saying I'm not against education. I'm against some form of education. There is a form of education, and that the Germans understand very well, technical education. Teach people how to make something, not learn sociology or physics or something very interesting, okay? But make them, teach them technical skills. And Germany, for example, half the Germans go through technical, via apprenticeship. Most of Italy, indirectly, via apprenticeship, the modus. So what I'm saying is education, unconditional education is very harmful. Targeted education should be on these things that are not socially, let's put it this way, you don't get invited to dinner, right, if you went to a technical school as compared to Harvard, for example. But the country needs people who don't get invited to dinner. You see the idea?
I fully agree.
Sorry. These are the two criticisms, not criticism. But they're major, right? In other words, let's finance education in making, teaching people to be electricians, to make pottery, to learn technical skills, to be crafts, into agricultural, artisanal activities. Thanks.
Thank you, Nassim. This is actually an extremely important point. It's a debate that happens, should happen a lot more in this country also, but it's something that is very consequential. We put way too much emphasis on what we perceive as the good education should be, which is the 4-year college, which is a track. And we have a real problem of a lot of these graduates not really finding jobs, but at the same time, we have another problem of not having enough technicians. We don't have enough mechanics. We don't have enough people that do these technical jobs. So some effort at encouraging and taking away the stigma from education that is not a 4-year college can go a long way towards helping our economic situation. Any other comments or thoughts on this question? Great. Sort of this leads us into another point that is fairly interesting, which is the headline is, let's put it under diaspora bonds. Raising financing for local projects and initiatives from the diaspora. The idea of infrastructure spending is usually a good idea. It employs a lot of people, it improves productivity, it does a lot of this stuff. When you look at a country like Lebanon, where our infrastructure, it's not sort of a luxury to spend on infrastructure, but it's something that is very sorely needed. And you look at global interest rates where they are now. I mean, we're literally at negative interest rates or zero interest rates around the world. There could be a lot of merit to a combination of public-private partnership for funding of some of these infrastructure projects. Kind of hits many birds with one stone for us. So with that, let me turn to Ren. Maybe you want to start off the conversation on this one with some thoughts.
Well, certainly economic growth is a topic that's not really taking a lot of attention, both in Lebanon and around the world. In fact, the other day, as I checked into my hotel room, there was a major story on CNN News, and the story was that the recession in Spain is over. Now, they were reporting that growth in Spain was positive 0.1%, and that was enough for them to celebrate the end of the recession. Now, they mentioned along the lines that the unemployment rate is still stuck at 22%, but that appeared to be like a relatively minor blemish on this exciting story that the recession is over. And this story reminds me a lot of Lebanon. On one hand, we have the very, very strong and successful banking sector. Folks at the central bank have been pursuing a really decent policy, which actually saved the lira during a lot of uncertain times. But at the same time, we're stuck with a at least, I think, I don't know the statistics exactly, but we're stuck with at least 20% unemployment in Lebanon, a very high debt to GDP ratio, and around a quarter of the population are living below the poverty line. So I think the goal of what I'm going to say today is how can we actually get the diaspora involved in creating jobs at the first place. Now, there's one school of thought that talks about remittances, and the argument is remittances can actually help improve economic growth and create jobs. What I want to say to this end is remittances has been really helpful. It actually helped the economy, but remittances is not and will not be our permanent path to development. So in other words, the government cannot really rely on remittances in order to create job opportunities for the Lebanese people. Now, the good news, which is my second point, is that remittances do provide us with very strong evidence that the diaspora do care about their home country, about their country of origin. And therefore, I think this should be an opportunity for us. And Mr. Malik mentioned diaspora bonds. And I think one way for us to tap into the diaspora is through these innovative financial tools, one of which is called the diaspora bond, which is simply a type of debt that would be structured in a way that it would provide a higher return on your investment. So for those people or immigrants who invest in this government-issued diaspora bond, they would get a higher return than what you normally get by putting your money in cash, by putting your cash in checking and saving accounts here in the US or elsewhere. And at the same time, it would be structured such that the government would actually pay lower than what they would actually pay on going on the open market. So just to summarize here, the rationale of this diaspora bond is twofold. It's actually a higher return for the diaspora, which get them engaged at the first place, and it's a cheap and stable source of funding for the government. Now, the most important point I want to make is these diaspora bonds should be actually targeted to projects that appeal to the diaspora. Whether it's healthcare, whether it's education, microfinance projects, and obviously there's a lot of talk about whether the government can be trusted in actually issuing this, but we can discuss this later. But finally, one final point is I think based on the structure of Lebanon and the diaspora around the world, we make a very good candidate for these type of bonds. Israel actually raised around $40 billion by issuing these bonds. India is another country, I think they raised around $12 billion. And I don't see why we shouldn't actually take these bonds or this financial instrument seriously to promote growth and create jobs. Thank you.
Thank you, Ren. A couple of points on diaspora remittances and diaspora bonds. As you might have heard, remittances are declining a little bit. We have two major macro factors that are affecting remittances in a country, and I think will continue to affect it for the near future. One of them is the fact that global GDP growth used to run in the 5-6% area. Now we're struggling at 2.5 to 3% area. That can have a very big effect on the earning potential of Lebanese overseas and their ability to send back money to the country. The other one that we don't really like to talk about a lot is FATCA, the American rule about money overseas. That has had a dampening effect on the desire of Lebanese to put money outside of whatever country they're living in because of reporting requirements, because of all the issues associated with it. So we have some aspects that are transitory, some that are permanent that are affecting this. Just on the diaspora bonds, it's important to keep in mind, please, that while the diaspora is very committed to Lebanon and would like to help in Lebanon, when it comes down to investment, these bonds have to stand on their own. The projects have to be appealing enough on their own merit as an investment. And then sort of the emotional appeal comes in pushing people to choose, A or B from the two options that they have. But I think it would be unrealistic to ask the diaspora to take a haircut on their investment just for that emotional appeal.
No, one comment. I think the money coming in has been declining largely and will decline in the future, largely because Saudi Arabia is a country that's currently in the process of very slowly going bankrupt in the best of circumstances. And I think the most likely circumstances is going to go bankrupt much faster than you think because they got their problems. So, and that is what's harming us, because a lot of the people in Saudi Arabia, the Lebanese in Saudi Arabia, may lose their jobs, lose everything. We may have to support them, you see.
Any other comments on this? Nabil?
We are trying in Idal, in Lebanon, to do some
Maybe,
some
sorry,
yes,
maybe talk a little bit about what IDAL does.
Okay. But let me introduce about the diaspora bond, because it is so important for us. In the time being, we are working about it. The main issue in Lebanon that we are a free economy, and with our laws there is no discrimination between the Lebanese and the foreign investors. That's why we are now tackling the diaspora through some projects, regional projects, as free zones or special economic zones that create some emotions from it to put in their own villages to help the economy. As IDAL is the Investment Development Authority of Lebanon. This authority was created in 1994 and enacted with a new law in 2001. This law gave the IDAL the tools to encourage. It has two main mandates. The first one is to encourage capitals to invest in Lebanon from foreigners, domestic, and from all around the world. And the second mission of IDAL is to promote and market for the export of production. But these two missions are under the same strategy of the government, of Lebanese government. As Mr. said, that these sectors are the same. We gave incentives, we gave market intelligence to do your feasibility study. All of these services are free. But more and more, there is a package of incentives for investors to do investment in Lebanon. Now, our strategy within what's happening in the region and what's happening and the effect and the impact of what's happening in the MENA region since 2011 until now. Our strategy is to diversify, not only to encourage investment, but to make a linkage between our diaspora and the Lebanese economy through direct investment or joint venture with some companies in Lebanese companies. Second is to enlarge the trade between Lebanon and the countries that our diaspora is living in. But the main is to encourage our diaspora to outsource the services or some industrial components to Lebanon. This is much important issue that will help the Lebanese economy, because we have products under the international standard. We can compete, but just we have to encourage our diaspora to know about the Lebanese companies, to let them compete with others, not to only compete with others in the services that they need in the IT, in the tech industry. We have a lot of things in Lebanon. You know Lebanon. I will not speak about Lebanon, about the advantages of Lebanon, about the human resources of Lebanon. You know it. I am so surprised with 2 days, and thanks for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to give us this opportunity, so that you are aware about Lebanon and Lebanese, the Lebanese more than people living in believe me. That's why you can depend on the Lebanese products, even in trade or even in outsourcing to Lebanon. And IDAL is ready to help you to dedicate or indicate the products that you need from any kind of, from any firm from Lebanon.
Thank you, Nabil. Now let's talk about something positive. We know the Lebanese have these tremendous abilities everywhere. I'll turn to Naeem to talk to us a little bit about what potential industry, services, activities we can start or build on in Lebanon as GDP drivers that have worked maybe in the West that are well suited to our country.
I have several ideas. Maybe before starting on a positive tone, first, I think what we need in Lebanon is to restore trust and confidence and to improve the brand of Lebanon in order to attract investors. This is the basic. And in order to do it, we have to fix some structural rigidities. First, macroeconomic imbalances. Interest rates are too high in Lebanon. Public debt is huge. The deficit, budget deficit is at 8%. We have to diminish the spending and try to find some revenues. Number two, reinforce weak institutions and the governance of the country. Number three, we have to work on improving the business climate and having a welcoming business climate more stable in terms of governance, facilitating financing and fixing infrastructure gaps, which is transporting, broadband and water. And the last one is a very important one, is the environmental issues that we have in Lebanon. World Bank, they evaluated the loss of 3% of the GDP per year because of pollution and environmental issues. Having said that, if we start restoring trust and confidence, we can work on, I think, a diaspora bond, which is very important. We can work on setting of funds outside Lebanon in order to attract money and have a sound governance and try to invest in infrastructure projects. We can work on BOT, we can work on private-public investment, and clearly we have to continue attracting remittance because the issue we have to find $5 billion every year in order to finance our budget deficit. Then this is really one of the big issue and the constraint that we have to manage internally. On the positive side, clearly Lebanon has a huge potential in terms of skills. We were too resilient, and the fact that Lebanon resisted so much, it means that we need a positive news, and the upside is huge. And I see two sectors with a huge potential. One is close to what we are doing. It's in finance. Today, the financial sector in Lebanon, it's 10% of the GDP in average, 4 to 5 billion net revenue. If we compare it to another country like Luxembourg, Luxembourg is 550,000 population. It's a GDP of $60 billion, $55 billion, close to Lebanon. They have one of the biggest financial center. We call it a center for funds of domiciliation. It's the second biggest center of the world after the US market and the biggest one in Europe. Then we can copy Luxembourg. We have all the strengths to do like Luxembourg, to have a domiciliation of funds, to have a custody transfer agent, and to work on the whole back office and middle office. We have the skills, we have lawyers, we have auditors in Lebanon. And if we do so, you have just to keep in mind that the financial sector in Luxembourg represents 40% of the GDP, which is $25 billion. In Lebanon, the financial sector, we are very proud of the financial sector, but it's only $5 billion altogether, which is less than 10%. Then we can copy Luxembourg. We need a better regulatory framework. We have the skills, and we need some planification on the long term by working on agreement with some countries. Luxembourg, they have 70 agreements with Asia, with Europe, with all over the world, and this is the place where we find more than 20 trillion of assets based in Luxembourg. This is one idea, and there are the ICT sector, but I can
to build
turn
up,
it to other people to develop the ICT, which is everything around information and technology.
just to follow, to build up on what Naeem was saying, I'll take a look at my own area, which is a subsection with the financial industry, which is hedge funds. Hedge funds is about $3 trillion in assets that largely grew in offshore entities in the Caribbean. As this industry grew from a few hundred million to 3 trillion, the stress that it put on the Caribbean infrastructure was tremendous. The companies that do the administration, the back office, the custody, all that for hedge funds, can't find people to work in this industry in the Caribbean. I mean, we're not talking about big labor markets there. What they need is essentially lawyers and accountants to do the NAVs, to do the, all the work associated with the hedge funds. A lot of these companies that do this custody are dying to get out of the Caribbean because they can't find the help that they can find there. So I thought it would be a good idea if we bring them to Lebanon. Lebanon, we have good offshoring laws. We have to build on them a little bit, but it's a perfect idea. Now, the first problem is because of the reputational risk of the country, no one of those custodians wanted to go and set up in Lebanon and say, okay, we're doing custody from Lebanon. So we came up with a second option, which is what if we establish a company in Lebanon that does this for them, but they outsource to it. So technically, they're still doing their administration wherever they are, but they're outsourcing to Lebanon. Well, the problem is you start taking people over there, you land in the country, and you turn on your smartphone to get your email, and suddenly it becomes a dumb phone because our telecom companies didn't have agreement with the outside companies that their phones work on roaming. You want to have your first meeting over Skype, and it's virtually impossible to have a meeting from people in Lebanon with people outside with the good quality that they have. So I'm only saying this as an example that we have the ability to do so much. I mean, our universities in Lebanon put out every year hundreds, if not thousands, of qualified accountants, qualified lawyers. We have very attractive labor costs in the country. We have a place where people want to live. So just think of what fixing these small, whether it's only internet. So, we're talking about just a little bit of economic stability. Internet that is in line with the rest of the world, where you can have, a conference via Skype or something. And there are so many things that we can work on. But again, we need that sort of help that comes from the political side. Any other comments on?
Just one brief thing. I think we all agree here that geopolitical, economic, social issues in Lebanon are highly interconnected. And it has actually proven to be very difficult for the government or for any private institution to isolate the economy and focus on. So to your point, Mark, I think one thing we can do is to have the government set the overall goal and pass it over, whether it's the diaspora bond or any other thing, to the private sector, which is perceived in the region to be extremely successful. Whether the central bank or the private banking sector, they're both highly transparent and successful. So,
thank you. Naseem?
I mean, I can link it to what I wanted to say in general, something vastly more structural. But if someone were to ask me what makes a country successful, I would say that the government focuses on small things, like a good legal system and good internet, and then the rest will take care of itself. But let's go back to what made countries successful. Let's go back to our history. As a model of how countries become successful, most people have the illusion that you need resources, tourism, stuff like that. Let's start with our country. The Phoenicians got rich. They were, at some point in time, the wealthiest people in the world. And at some point, if you take a place like Aleppo is the richest country in the history of the world over a long period of time. It lasted 3,000 years, the Aleppo region, okay? So why and how did we get rich? Well, because we had nothing. So during the Iron Bronze Age transition, The Phoenicians said, okay, we're going to go to a country called Cyprus, named after copper, to get some copper, because we need copper. So what happens when you go to Cyprus, okay, to buy some copper? Well, you learn how to navigate, you know? So now you have two things. You have boats, you figured out how to, boats, and you figure out how to buy copper from the Cypriots. So now you buy a little more copper from the Cypriots that you sell elsewhere, and then you start saying, well, I'm going to use boats to sell something other than copper. Find some other person who wants to sell something, and then this is how our networks go. Basically, we had nothing. If you take that model, that's the most robust model in history. Singapore today is the wealthiest country in the world. Singapore, okay. Forget about Qatar, that's artificial, okay. That's going to go anyway soon. So you take Singapore, they had the same situation. Hong Kong, okay. Venice. They basically have the ability to overcompensate for the fact they have no resources and turn water into gold. So that's a model. The model is a model of overcompensation. You have nothing, you're forced to find something that works, and because you can't survive any other way. This is pretty much our story, but people forget our history, okay? Is that we were rich when nobody was rich, okay? And we didn't even bother having an army, because when invaders would come, we tell them, listen, what do you want, 100% of nothing or 10% of something? So this is a check, thanks, all right? Except for people in Tyre who are a little, you know, always difficult. You know, they fought Alexander. Other than that, you know, so that was, and that's the system that worked. And it didn't stop till these nation states started, you know, after the Ottoman Empire. So let's go back to that model and figure out what made us successful, because we taught others how to do so.
Thank you. You want to weigh a little bit on potentially what industry, what sectors you think would work?
Let me tell you what doesn't work. What doesn't work. There's something, actually, one of the reasons why no country who had resources ever really got rich, okay? You can pretty much, or within a country, places where they have resources are going to be the poorest, okay? There's something commonly known as the Dutch disease, okay? So if you're like, take Saudi Arabia, okay? The worst thing that ever happened to these poor people is discovering oil. Because 10 years from now, they're going to say, okay, what's left, okay? Whereas, so that's the Dutch disease. So having resources and focusing on tourism is very fragile, because tourism can go, okay? Plus, it creates distortions in your country. You get weird people coming in, rich people, they're going to bid up prices. It creates social distortions, creates envy, creates a lot of ill will. The Phoenicians didn't have tourism, okay? Or they had bad tourists, like Babylonians coming in. So so I would say that I wouldn't focus too much on tourism, okay? It's nice, but don't try to develop tourism because it's fragile. One thing you want to do is technical skills, maximum technical skills, and typically, if we look another parameter, what makes, you know, these industrial booms take place is when you have to prevent people like all of us, or the three of us at least, okay, from leaving the country. You want people who are 25 to stay in Lebanon, because all you need is for them to stay in Lebanon. So give them a good internet, not to do Skypes with employers, but so they can talk to their friends on Facebook so they won't have to leave the country. So keep them in, and that creates what they had in California. What they have in the country, I can't pronounce the name, maybe it doesn't exist. South of Lebanon, there's that country that's not on a map. Okay, so that's what they did, is so long as people do not leave the place when they turn 23, you make sure, we're glad we have university presidents here, they stay in Lebanon for their education, continue in Lebanon, and try to start whatever they want to start, okay, some crazy company in Lebanon. You want to give them the incentive to stay. So.
Thank you, Nassim. Nabil?
Yes. Yes, for the sectors that are our opportunities, depending on the competitive advantages of Lebanon, and throughout what's happening, as I repeat, what's happening, and we have noticed through since 2011 till now, there is some sectors that are really encouraging investment decreased, yes, from $3.9 billion in 2010 to $2.34 billion in 2016-15.
We certainly were not disparaging higher education. I mean, you know, you are, but let me speak for the rest of us. We place tremendous value on higher education. All I was trying to say is it's not a model of one size fits all. There are some people that are gifted that everybody should be educated. The question is, what is the mix between higher education and technical education?
Let's take numbers. The country in Europe that was the wealthiest for a long time, Switzerland, was a country with the lowest rate of higher education. Now, people may think that, hey, you know, they're not educated. In fact, they were very educated. They're skilled. So we have to distinguish between skills in society that you need, you know, you cannot get from a library, and skills you can get by going on Wikipedia or Google, you know, or Google Scholar. So this is how we distinguish from skills. And effectively, the countries that are wealthiest and gotten the wealthiest, take Korea, Switzerland, Germany, Northern Europe, okay, in general, are countries with a huge amount of that skill that you cannot buy by sending someone to some university. That's the first one. The second one, as a professor at a university, you know, I'm a professor, and I have always been against higher education simply because if you make it very difficult for people to go to university to get a PhD in these weird subjects, make it difficult, then you get better selection. And effectively, that's what's happening in Germany. The Germans love their professor. When I'm in Germany, Professor Dr. Taleb, all right, I get any table in any restaurant, okay? But this is very nice. But I discovered why. Because they have very few of them. Because they have very few of them and they keep it that way, and they love what they call episteme on a weekend, but they want the real thing on a weekday. Monday to Friday, you know, they want the bottom line. So pretty much the cultural production is something that comes later. It's like theater or other things. We're not gonna get economic growth from financing theater production and cultural activities, but we love them. Okay? The same thing with sociology, anthropology, and all these interesting things. Okay? So it's not our job to go finance them. You let people who are rich write a check, and they enjoy the product.
But by the way, if you look at a lot of these very successful sort of city-states or countries, or they have a very high level of education, but they score consistently the highest at the lower level of education, at the elementary school, at the high school level. That's where a lot of that preparation happens.
Exactly. I mean, I went to India twice, and between two visits, I presented my thing to Modi, the Prime Minister of India. And the second time he made his big speech, he said, I want 1,000 schools for every university, new university. He said, I want 1,000 high schools, I want 1,000 actually middle school, he said, it was whatever they call it. And that was his slogan, Modi. He wanted, because the Indians, of course, are like us, they like professors and ideas and stuff like that, but they ignored, unlike the Chinese, the
That's
lower
where the
level.
base happens.
This is George Ferris, excuse me.
Oh.
It's wonderful to see you, all of you in here, but I'd like to ask you one question. This is called diaspora energy. How can we strengthen this? How can we make it across the world or across the United States? How can we unify this model? You guys all created models, but how can we unify this diaspora so we all meet every time and we all exchange idea to create better community?
I'm using what Henry Ford, what he said. Coming together is a beginning, keeping together is progress, and working together is success. We have to continue working together and translate this success into concrete initiative. I think LIFE, the association about Lebanese executive, is one example of unifying all financial people around the world. And we can do exactly the same in all other sectors. I think we have the medical sector that is one of the huge strengths of Lebanon. We can do it with all doctors around the world. We can do it with teaching and education. We can do it. And we have to unify and join forces for the time being outside Lebanon to prepare Lebanon for the future and for the future generation, because it's our duty to do it. If we don't do it, it will be the end of Lebanon.
Go ahead. Back there. Sorry.
Hi, my name is Jabba. I'm an attorney, senior associate attorney at Mayor Brown in Washington, D.C. My question is, well, first of all, there are two recurring themes throughout this last day or so, I would say. First is, we all agree that there's a tremendous business acumen among Lebanese in Lebanon and Lebanese outside of Lebanon. Second is, there's this tremendous emotional attachment to the country. Lebanese tend to want to invest in their country if there's the right platform for it. And in particular, I would say in the real estate sector, given that there's a recent dip in the market, and by recent I mean the last 2 or 3 or 4 years even, the local real estate market in Lebanon. And I guess this is something that perhaps to Adam can address. What can the banking sector do? Maybe it's the DL, or maybe it's the commercial banks, or maybe both working together in terms of getting the real estate sector back on track. And one concept I can think of that's very prevalent in the U.S. is the concept of refinancing, where you can get back to the basics of the terms of your loan and see what you work with your bank to see what you can fix and what you can change depending on the status quo and how the winds are shifting economically and in particular in the real estate sector. So aside from refinancing, what other ideas can be discussed to address the recent dip in the real estate market?
Yeah, actually, I don't think we have a problem in the real estate sector. The real estate sector is successful. We have two kinds of real estate actually in Lebanon. We have the small apartments for housing, and we have the luxury apartments for rich people. What I said before, the scheme that has been put in place by the central bank is to protect the sector. How we can protect this? By providing financing again. So if you provide financing for small apartments, I'm talking about the ceiling of, in dollars, $530,000 as a ceiling. So the real estate in this area, it's very stable, and we have demand, and we have funding available. For the other real estate, which is luxurious apartments and lands and projects, actually in Lebanon, sorry, Mark, we don't like the word bankrupt. We use restructuring. So in Lebanon, we need to find a way to restructure those loans or those financing needs to this real estate sector. So for the banking sector, we are ready to help the real estate sector by providing housing loans on one side and restructuring the loans that maybe have some past due on it. So this is our solution. We need to find a solution through financing. And let's hope we will have better days after the war in Syria will end. Maybe the Gulf countries will come back to Lebanon. Then it will be much easier.
So we'll take one last question. As time is running out, we'll take it over there.
Morning. I want to thank His Excellency and the Consul General Majdi Ramadan for hosting this. We have a lot of talent on this panel, and I hope we can put some ideas together how to move this country forward. Security situation has been with us for the last 40, 50 years. It's not going to change right away because as long as we're on the fault line in the Middle East, it's going to stay this. We can't wait for it. His Excellency, the Minister of Education, talked about having a change in the curricula. We need to do that. We need to stress technical education. Like Nassim said, let me weigh in on this a little bit. In Germany, they have what they call the Hochtechnische Schule, where people need to learn skills. In Aleppo, there was about 3,000 factories that had been dismantled, destroyed, moved to Turkey or whatever. Let's go back to basic. On our university, I'm involved in startup as an engineer. We live on Long Island, 4 million people, the size of Lebanon. We had industries. Grumman used to employ 30,000 people. They all left the head of the university came and said, he put a blue ribbon commission, said, what can we do to keep people here? We have too many degrees. So we created an innovative center, an entrepreneurial center, where we encourage students to innovate new ideas and how to start manufacturing over again. So we have, my washer broke. My wife called to service it, $150 to get in the door. You can't get a graduate now to make $150 an hour. So we need to stress that, and we need to create that culture. Dr. Jabraz was loud and clear in his screen yesterday. We need to help for the universities to create some centers around the university to keep those students in Lebanon, because now the door is closing them. We used to groom them, we teach them, we give them baccalaureate and send them over to the Gulf in Canada. Right now that door is closing, we need to keep them in there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for attending today, and thanks again to the panelists here.